104th Infantry Division, Dora Mittelbau. 71st Infantry Division, Gunskirchen, 103rd Infantry Division, Landsberg. 80th Infantry Division, Buchenwald and Ebensee, 99th Infantry Division, Dachau Subcamps. 83rd Infantry Division, Langenstein. 95th Infantry Division, Vale. 84th Infantry Division, Allem and Salzwedel. 90th Infantry Division, Flossenburg. 86th Infantry Division, Attendorn. 89th Infantry Division, Ohrdruf. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the presentation of the national colors and the national anthem. Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Sara Bloomfield, Director of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum.
"40 years ago, Elie Wiesel presented the findings of the President's Commission on the Holocaust that eventually led to the creation of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. In his letter to President Carter, he posed the very question that brings us together today: why remember? Ellie cited several reasons. He wrote, first, we cannot grant the killers a posthumous victory. Forgetting would make us complicit. Second, he said, we cannot deny the victims the fulfillment of their last wish to bear witness. He then referred to the survivors, writing, a survivor sees himself or herself as a messenger and a guardian of secrets entrusted by the dead. A survivor fears he may be the last to remember, the last to warn, the last to tell the tale that cannot be told, but the tale that must be told. Those tales are particularly pertinent to the tumultuous times we live in. Here's how Lily Melnick described her first 2 days in Auschwitz. You are told your name is a number. Forget your name. You don't have a name anymore. And you're hungry, and you have no clothes, and you're freezing, and your family is taken away. At 16, I felt like I was 90. It was very hard for me to accept. Yet I got a hold of myself. I pushed all this behind me, and I said, I have to live. I have to be strong. Vlad Kamid was in the Warsaw Ghetto with her mother and younger brother. Although her mother suffered from disease and severe starvation, every week she saved 2 slices of bread to give to an old man in exchange for bar mitzvah lessons for her son. Of course, this was not to be. Vladka later said, during the war, my mother taught me what it means to be human. Gerda Klein spoke about liberation. I lost my 3 best friends. My closest friend, Ilsa, died the week before. Susie died on Liberation morning, and Liesel a couple of days later. People think of a concentration camp as a snake pit where people stepped on each other. They didn't see that there was kindness and friendship and love, and that was the sustaining part. Norbert Wollheim told of his shock at seeing a friend in Auschwitz praying. He demanded to know why. His friend said, I am praising God, to which an angry Norbert retorted, are you out of your mind? Praising God here, in this situation where we are isolated, left alone in this hell? What are you thanking God for? His friend responded, I am thanking God for the fact that he did not make me like the murderers around us. The wisdom of survivors is, of course, timeless. But in our world of change and fear, growing anti-Semitism and racism, their wisdom is particularly timely. They remind us that even under the most horrific circumstances, the most brutal crimes, and the complete abandonment of the world, they were able to preserve their dignity, to demonstrate their love, to perform acts of solidarity, and above all, to hope. That is why, back in 1979, Elie Wiesel added one final reason to remember. He wrote, we must remember for our own sake, for the sake of our own humanity. For the most vital lesson to be drawn from the Holocaust is that Auschwitz was possible because the enemy succeeded in dividing, in separating, in splitting human society, and not enough people cared. So today, as we remember the humanity of the victims, we must challenge our own responsibility for confronting division, separation, splitting, our own responsibility for the future of humanity, because, as Elie Wiesel said, not enough people cared.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sigal Mandelker, Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence.
Good morning, Holocaust survivors, colleagues, family, and friends. I remember attending this ceremony nearly a quarter century ago, and to be here today delivering this address is incredibly humbling. I want to thank the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Council, Sara Bloomfield, Stacy Burdett, and others for inviting me. As I stand here, I can feel the presence of my grandparents who did not survive the Holocaust and those who did. Of my wonderful mother, who we lost nearly 14 years ago, and of my inspirational father, who is watching the speech by live stream. As the Undersecretary of the Treasury for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, I have the great honor of deploying the United States economic authorities, including sanctions against a wide range of national security and illicit finance threats. We have used these authorities to target corrupt actors and human rights abusers around the world, including from Syria and Iran to Venezuela and Nicaragua to South Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and elsewhere. Hundreds of times in the past 2 years, we have isolated from the financial system those who commit grave human rights abuses or plunder their countries for personal gain. Our objective is to change behavior, inspire democracy and freedom, and disrupt the ability of kleptocrats, human rights abusers, and others from stealing the wealth of their country. We work every day to balance those tools in support of and alongside humanitarian needs. We want to keep funding from the dictators and despots who use violence to retain power and wealth while supporting those who suffer tremendously at the hands of destructive leaders. We have a great tradition of this at the United States Treasury Department. It was a history that was chronicled in a terrific book by Dr. Rebecca Erbelding, a historian at the museum, called Rescue Board: The Untold Story of America's Efforts to Save the Jews of Europe. This history began on April 9, 1940, when, immediately after Nazi Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, then Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau, called the head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and asked him to freeze the accounts of Denmark and Norway in order to immediately block Hitler's access to those funds. Just freeze them, Morgenthau said. The following day, President Roosevelt would issue an executive order formally prohibiting transactions relating to Denmark and Norway unless the Treasury Department issued a license authorizing such a transaction. In the ensuing months, as other countries were invaded, Treasury would do the same to U.S.-held assets of those countries. They managed to freeze literally billions of dollars, keeping that money out of the hands of the Nazis and other enemies. This effort was led by 31-year-old John Paley, the director of the newly created Foreign Funds Control Department, which is the predecessor office of one of the components that I now oversee, the Office of Foreign Assets Control. The United States was using its economic might long before it had entered the war militarily. Morgenthau would call this the unseen front. But the Treasury Department didn't stop there. In the summer of 1943, the World Jewish Congress asked Treasury for a license to allow funds into Nazi-occupied Europe to help save Jews. The idea for this license came from Gerhard Riegner, the author of the now famous Riegner cable that alerted Americans to the Nazis' final solution. Treasury had received similar requests to send humanitarian aid, but they had always feared that it was too dangerous, lest they send the funds into the wrong hands. It wasn't until John Paley was informed that these funds would be used to help Jewish children in hiding in France to escape that Treasury officials decided to issue the license, so long as there were safeguards in place. Unfortunately, it would take months to effectuate the license, as the effort met strong resistance from the State Department, where we now know officials had hidden news of the massacre of millions of Jews and others. During that long struggle with the State Department, Paley and others began to learn about the murders underway in Europe. After they learned of the deeply disturbing efforts to hide these atrocities, Treasury staff told Morgenthau. This was January 1944. This would lead Morgenthau within days to appeal directly to President Roosevelt to take action to rescue Jews and others being hunted by Hitler. Roosevelt agreed, and he established the War Refugee Board in January 1944, ultimately assigning its leadership to those Treasury officials who, when they started to learn about the genocide underway in Europe, stood up to do the right thing. The War Refugee Board's work resulted in saving tens of thousands of people and assisting many more. When I learned about the efforts of those dedicated Treasury Department officials nearly 80 years ago, I was stunned. At the very same moment that those Treasury officials were providing support to the effort to help Jewish children escape, my parents were Jewish children in hiding in Eastern Europe. They were hiding underground, in forests, in ditches, and under haystacks. I grew up hearing their stories, including about moments of great courage, some of which resulted in survival, and others that ended in death. It was around 1943 and 1944 when my mom was hiding in the woods with her mother and her two aunts. On one particular day, my grandmother, who was biologically my great aunt, but who would raise my mom after her mother died as a result of the Holocaust, was carrying my mom on her back. My mom was 4 or 5 at the time. They had been in hiding for months. They were walking through a cemetery when my grandmother decided that she had had enough. And she said, "I want to walk to the road and have the Germans catch us and end our lives." My mom, a young child, responded, "No, you are old. You have lived your life. I am young. I have not yet lived mine." As my grandmother would later tell the story, she answered my mom with fierce conviction in her voice. "No, I will not throw you to the Germans. We will continue." For the rest of her life, my grandmother, who was probably in her early 20s at the time, would credit my mom, this little girl, for saving their lives. My dad recalls the last time he saw his mother. It was around 1942. She was in a carriage heading off to the town of Dubno, and he remembers watching as she rode away. She had volunteered to go to Dubno to get documents that could have helped protect her sister. During her journey, my grandmother stayed overnight with members of her family in the Dubno ghetto. That night, the Germans liquidated that part of the ghetto where she was staying. She was able to find a hiding spot with others, but after it got quiet, early the next morning, my brave grandmother decided to leave despite warnings that she could be killed. That was the last time anyone would see her. There were many times that my parents came perilously close to death. My dad recalls as a child running in the woods away from German soldiers who were shooting and shouting. He vividly remembers hearing a single shot and then a Jewish man cry out. My dad and others quickly ran to hide under thick bushes by the side of the road. They could hear the German soldiers nearby. Eventually, they decided to move to try to escape. As my dad crawled to the edge of the bushes, he saw a German soldier very close to him, looking around, his rifle ready to shoot. My dad motioned for those behind him to stay down. The German soldiers didn't find them that day, but there is no question that any slip or sound would have meant that neither he nor I would be here today. I also grew up hearing about the righteous people who risked and gave their lives to save my parents. There was the farmer my grandfather worked for who woke my dad and others early one morning and told them to quickly run away because the Germans were coming. There was the couple who allowed my mom and others to hide in a ditch on their property for months. They would feed my mom and her family at night. They were killed later for hiding Jews. When you grow up as the child of survivors, these stories of survival, ultimate sacrifice, and courage live with you every day. You imagine yourself in the position of your grandparents, with the responsibility of protecting children, running and hiding in the forest, and you pray that you would find the strength to carry them through the woods. This past weekend, all of our lives were once again hit with tragic anti-Semitism at Chabad of Poway. The breaking news of another synagogue attack sent shockwaves through our community. We have heard stories of intense bravery as congregants put themselves at risk to save others and law enforcement sprang into action. This shooting, as we all know, took place exactly 6 months after the horrific massacre of Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh's Squirrel Hill, where we likewise heard of great acts of courage from first responders and fellow congregants. There were 3 congregations holding services in Tree of Life on the morning of that attack. One was Dor Chadash, the congregation that I grew up in. Dor Chadash is a congregation that has always focused on community, on values, on study, and on participation. Until just a few years ago, nearly every week, my father attended that particular Shabbat service that the gunman attacked. During a memorial service after the shooting, Rabbi Cheryl Klein, the cantor of Dor Chadash, described our congregation as a small but mighty congregation that is composed of seekers, learners, lovers, and doers. Whether in the 1940s or today, it is imperative that we continue to come together as a community, to participate, to be seekers, to be doers, to have courage. What does that mean for those of us in public service? For me, it means that we must constantly remember that somewhere in the world today, there is a child and a mother wandering the forest with no place to go other than a hiding spot in a ditch or a refugee camp surrounded by guards. For some, the Holocaust feels like a distant memory. For those survivors in the room, it has never left your side. And as it has for my father for many years, it may come alive again in your nightmares. For many around the world today who suffer starvation, torture, murder, and other grave deprivation, it is, in another form, their reality. For those of us in the Treasury Department, public service requires that we constantly strive to cut off the funds that enable those who commit those heinous acts. It requires that we use sanctions, just as Secretary Morgenthau ordered in 1940 to freeze the assets of despots and dictators. It requires that we use the full force of our diplomatic means, and that we grant humanitarian licenses to help those suffering, just as the Treasury Department did so many years ago for those Jewish children in hiding. As public servants, we have to constantly challenge ourselves to use these authorities wisely, to be smart, strategic, and tactical, to have courage, to be brave, to be compassionate. We must make sure that we are not choosing the tactics that make us feel like we are making a difference, as some may have been lulled into doing 80 years ago. We must use the tools that in practice make that difference. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ron Dermer, Ambassador of Israel to the United States.
Chairman Lorber, Vice Chairman Holt, Director Bloomfield, Undersecretary Mandelker, Rabbi Myers, members of Congress, fellow diplomats, and above all, the survivors and their families who are with us here today. Every year we gather here to mark Yom HaShoah, the solemn day when my country, Israel, remembers the 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. And every year, the ambassador of Israel is given the honor of speaking at this majestic and moving ceremony. But last year I was not here on Yom HaShoah. I was in Poland, where I joined 13,000 Jews and non-Jews from around the world for the 30th annual March of the Living. In Poland, we visited the monuments to the destruction of European Jewry, the mass graves in the forests outside Tykocin, the hundreds of haunting stones in the fields of Treblinka, and the infamous gates at the entrance to Auschwitz. And I stood on the site of Mila 18, where 76 years ago this month, brave Jewish fighters made their last stand in the Warsaw Ghetto. They defiantly declared to the Nazis and to a callous world 3 simple words: "We are here." But ladies and gentlemen, the most remarkable moment of my trip came at Majdanek. Majdanek was a death camp in eastern Poland, liberated by the Soviets in July 1944, before the Nazis could destroy the evidence of their horrific crimes. To visit Majdanek is to visit a place where time stands still, where guard towers and gas chambers look exactly as they did 75 years ago. Most disturbing of all is the mausoleum there that preserves a huge mound of human ash, a macabre monument to unimaginable evil. I will never forget that day in Majdanek, but I will remember it not just because of its stark reminders of the depths of Nazi cruelty. I will also remember it because of the phone call I was connected to that day, a call between the national security advisors of the United States and Israel. At the time, the U.S. was preparing its response to President Assad's repeated use of chemical weapons against his own people. Israel was trying to foil an imminent Iranian attack against us from Syria and preparing our response if those efforts failed. The call between our 2 national security advisors, which had been delayed a couple of times that day, was set up to ensure that both countries were on the same page. When my phone finally rang, I found myself inside the crematorium at Majdanek. I quickly stepped outside and walked toward a nearby fence topped with barbed wire. As I listened to the conversation, I leaned against the fence, I turned around and looked up. To my left, I saw the ominous chimney that towers above the crematorium. To my right, I saw that mausoleum filled with human ash. It was the most surreal moment I have ever experienced. There I was, staring at the ultimate symbols of Jewish powerlessness while discussing Israeli military strikes against forces that vow to destroy the Jewish state. There I was thinking about a world that during the Holocaust hardly lifted a finger to save Jews as thousands were being gassed each day, while listening to America's national security advisor talk of a U.S. strike against a regime that gassed children and unequivocally supported Israel's right to defend itself. Never have I experienced a moment that better encapsulates the profound transformation that has occurred in the life of the Jewish people with the birth of the Jewish state. Ladies and gentlemen, it is easy to lose sight of this transformation given the resurgence of anti-Semitism in recent years. Despite the hopes of many, the horrors of the Holocaust did not put an end to anti-Semitism. For a half-century after the Holocaust, Jew hatred was largely dormant in the free world. But over the past 2 decades, it has reemerged as a global force. We saw its evil ambitions in a conference in Durban in 2001 and in the streets of Charlottesville in 2017. In recent years, there have been numerous murderous attacks against Jews outside of Israel. Militant Islamists struck at a Chabad house in Mumbai in 2008, at a Jewish school in Toulouse in 2012, at a Jewish museum in Brussels in 2014, inside a kosher supermarket in Paris in 2015, and outside a synagogue in Copenhagen a few weeks later. 6 months ago, a white supremacist murdered 11 people in a synagogue in Pittsburgh in the deadliest anti-Semitic attack in U.S. history. And on Saturday, another white supremacist murdered Lori Gilbert Kay, Zichrona Livracha, and wounded 3 others as they prayed in a synagogue in Poway, California. In recent years, we have also seen anti-Semitism increasingly poison minds in the political classes of what once proudly called itself the West. It has already poisoned a great party in Great Britain, and its noxious fumes have even penetrated this marble-domed sanctuary of democracy. The Jew hatred of growing parts of the intellectual class is even worse. We have seen how the climate at universities has become more and more toxic for Jewish students, and how blatant discrimination against the world's only Jewish state has put a new face on the world's oldest hatred. We have also seen one of the world's most prestigious newspapers become a cesspool of hostility toward Israel that goes well beyond any legitimate criticism of a fellow imperfect democracy. The same New York Times that a century ago mostly hid from their readers the Holocaust of the Jewish people has today made its pages a safe space for those who hate the Jewish state. Through biased coverage, slanderous columns, and anti-Semitic cartoons, its editors shamefully choose, week after week, to cast the Jewish state as a force for evil. But ladies and gentlemen, if you think that the resurgence of anti-Semitism today proves that nothing has changed, think again. Think about that phone call in Majdanek. Everything has changed. 8 decades ago, the American government was largely indifferent to the plight of the Jews. Today, the American government is Israel's greatest ally, strongly supporting Israel's right to defend itself and generously providing us with tools we need to do that job. And far more important, 8 decades ago, the Jewish people were a stateless and powerless people. Today, we are a powerful sovereign nation with a voice, a refuge, and most importantly, a shield. Ladies and gentlemen, what has changed is that the Jewish people are no longer spectators to history, but actors in history. What has changed is that the defiant call of those brave Warsaw Ghetto fighters now beats in the hearts of the brave men and women who defend the Jewish state. What has changed is that a proud and sovereign Jewish people now defiantly declare to all those who seek our destruction, from Tehran to Toulouse, from Pittsburgh to Poway, 3 simple Hebrew words: Am Yisrael Chai. Israel lives. And with faith in God and in ourselves, we pledge on this day, above all days, that no force on earth will remove us from the stage of history again. May the memory of the 6 million be blessed. Yehi zichram baruch.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for El Malei Rachamim, prayer for the dead. It will be chanted by Rabbi Chazan Dr. Jeffrey Myers from the Tree of Life or L'Simcha in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
מלא רחמים, שוכן ממלאים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, כנפי השינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזר רקיע מזהירים את כל הנשמות של 6 מיליוני היהודים, חללי השואה באירופה, שנהרגו ושנשחטו, שנשרפו ושנספו על קידוש השם בידי המרצחים הגרמנים ויוזריהם משאר העמים, באושוויץ, טרבלינקה, מיידנק, מאוטהאוזן, ברגן-בלזן, סוביבור, ובשאר מחנות ההשמדה, שהלכו לעולמם, ובעבור שכל הקהל מתפלל לעילוי נשמותיהם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתם, ויעמדו לגורלם לקץ הימים, ונאמר
Please be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, Alan Holt, Vice Chair of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council.
Good morning. As Howard said earlier, today is an important anniversary. He spoke about how the 42nd and 45th Infantry Divisions and the 20th Armored Division liberated Dachau exactly 74 years ago today. That day, of course, was another intense day in what turned out to be the final days of the Allied assault on Nazi Germany. Hitler would kill himself the next day. A little over a week later, the war in Europe would be over. But also, on that very same day, April 29th, 1945, in other parts of Germany, American soldiers, in pursuit of military victory, were coming across other camps and former camp inmates who had been left on the sides of roads and in railroad cars, left to die. In one of those cattle cars was a 25-year-old man who had spent 6 years imprisoned in many camps, including Auschwitz, Grossrosen, Buchenwald, Natzweiler, and Dachau. That man was my father. And as he told us many times after he emerged from the train, he met the woman who would later become my mother and her two sisters, Sally and Esther, all three having spent the war together in the Lodz Ghetto, Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, and Dachau. After 6 years of starvation, abuse, and hard labor, thanks to those brave American soldiers, they were now free. My father and my mother's two sisters, my aunts, are here today. Like other survivors, they rebuilt their lives, a new family in a new homeland. Like other survivors, they never turned their back on life. They embraced humanity and the future. Like other survivors, they adored America, its possibilities, its hopefulness, and particularly its values of liberty, equality, and justice. And like other survivors, they became an inspiration to others, especially to me, my sister, our cousins, and our whole family. Like other survivors, my parents and aunts and uncles taught their children to love life, to never give up, to never take for granted the freedom of America, and to always be vigilant. Above all, the survivors, including those with us today, have also taught us to never forget who we lost and what we lost. It is for the millions we lost that we light these memorial candles this morning. The candles will be lit by the following survivors: Esther Drew, Sally Wolf, Jack Feldman, Peter Londe, Susan Darvis, Peter Feigl, Ralph Barretz, Joel Namick, Maria Dvorshetska, Morris Rosen, Rose Helene Sprayregan, and Louis de Groot. As the survivors light the candles, the names of victims will be read by two participants in the museum's leadership training programs, Chief Darrell McSwain of the Maryland National Park Police, Montgomery County Division, and Major Thomas Bordner of the United States Army. I would like to begin by reciting the names of my own grandparents who perished at the hands of the Nazis. Hinda Holsecker, Avram Holsecker, Dora Miroslavsky, and Samuel Miroslavsky.
Frida Wise, Marcel Huyer, Sharon Rosenthal Lickman, Lola Lenkonich, Julius Lesser, Henri Jore, Tikla Mendoz, Rivka Gutman, Antonius Vanda Vathorst, Mordechai Auerbach, Beatrice Prince, Anna Knoll, Berta Summer Leta, Theodore Porges, Coca Pasternak, Carl Spock, Esther Friedman,
John Marchebuth, Mosek Horn, Yakov Walkowitz, Jacob Weiss, Kleber Sukor, Henry Foy, Ernst Joachim Arnaldi, Maria Chair Mina, David Schachter, Roger Lacroix, Fagel Blockstein, Heva Einzen, Sara Gruber, Andrash Leos Faber, Shifra Dombrauer, Rosa Selapa, Johann Kotanyi, Saimacha Munzer, Yankova Lak, Elsa Schwartz.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as Holocaust survivor and museum volunteer Alex Shipman Shiloh leads us in the recitation of the Mourners' Kaddish.
Also in memory of my grandparents, Rachel and Joseph Fried. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה, ועלמה דברה קירותי, וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומייכון, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם ולעולמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקדושה ברכו לאלה מכל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן ועלמה, ואמרו אמן. יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיא, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, על כל ישראל ועל כל עמי תבל, ואמרו אמן.
Please remain standing for the singing of the Hymn of the Partisans, led by Rabbi Chazan Dr. Myers, and the retirement of the flags.
Himlen bleien forstellen bleie Tag. Komm in Bett noch der reuste Bett beschau. Es wird der Beut unser Gott mir sein kann. Komm in Bett noch unser reuste Bett beschau. Es wird der Beut unser Gott mir sein kann. Es wird wie morgen Sonntag Jürgen und zum Wein. Und der Netten wird verschweinen mit Main. Nur öfter zusammen wird die Sonne mit der Jahr. Wie am Marlaub wird das Lied von dort zu da. Nur öfter zusammen wird die Sonne mit der Jahr. Wie am Marlaub wird das Lied von dort zu da. Never say you're traveling down the final mile. Alone the clouds fly up the roof.
Thank you for sharing our national commitment to Holocaust remembrance. Ladies and gentlemen, the program has concluded.